This entitled HOA president had the nerve to show up at my door, demanding I pay $3,200 in fees for a neighborhood I never joined. When I refused, she escalated to fake police officers and racial intimidation tactics. But here's what she didn't know. I'm a Marine Corps veteran who owned the land her precious HOA office was built on. Wait until you hear what happened when she called me one of those people to my face. The cheap plastic badges made that familiar hollow sound against my door, while her cloying perfume invaded my space. Two white men in polo shirts with fake credentials were trying to intimidate a black veteran on his own property. The audacity was staggering. What would you do if Karen next door tried to steal $3,000 from you, then sent fake cops when you said no? Because what happened next is every HOA victim's dream come true, with a twist that exposes the ugly racism still poisoning suburban America. I didn't just fight back, I completely destroyed their entire corrupt operation while documenting every racist comment for the whole world to see. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this revenge story has everything: fake cops, financial fraud, racial profiling, a public meltdown, and the sweetest justice you'll ever witness. Stick around, because the racial slurs she used when cornered will shock you. My name is Terrell Washington, and 6 months ago I thought I'd found my slice of the American dream. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and losing my wife Maria to cancer, I needed a place to heal where the only explosions were backfiring engines in my auto shop. That's when I inherited my grandfather Samuel's old farmhouse in Millbrook County, 3.2 acres of Georgia red clay, with a 1940s craftsman house, weathered barn, and the workshop where I could rebuild engines and maybe rebuild myself. But you'll never guess what my grandfather hid in the property deed that would become my secret weapon. The crunch of gravel under my work boots each morning felt like coming home to roots I'd never known. The smell of motor oil mixed with sawdust from my woodworking projects, and the sound of wind through those ancient pecan trees. It was exactly what my grieving soul needed. Granddad Samuel had lived there for 60 years, raising vegetables and fixing anything with an engine, completely self-sufficient on land his father bought when segregation still ruled the South. But 5 years ago, developers swooped in and built Willowbrook Estates all around my property. 200 identical cookie-cutter homes with perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. They created an HOA to manage their pools, landscaping, and community center. Fair enough for their suburban paradise. What wasn't fair was assuming they could rope in property that predated their subdivision by 8 decades, especially when that property belonged to a black family. The racism was subtle at first, but you're about to see how quickly masks come off when money's involved. Enter Victoria Whitmore, age 45, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood guardian of property values and community standards. Picture every entitled suburban mom stereotype rolled into one perfectly manicured package, with the added bonus of casual racism disguised as concern for neighborhood character. She drove a white BMW X5, wore designer athleisure to Whole Foods, and used her HOA authority like a weapon to maintain what she called the kind of community we all moved here for. The smell of her expensive perfume announced her arrival before her engine did. She marched up to my door that Tuesday morning, clipboard armed and loaded with a stack of violation notices thicker than a military manual. "Mr. Washington, I'm Victoria from the Willowbrook HOA. We need to discuss your property compliance issues immediately." I wiped grease off my hands with an old Marine Corps t-shirt. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. I'm not part of any HOA." Her smile was sharper than broken glass, and I caught something in her tone, that particular inflection white folks use when they're about to explain something they think you're too stupid to understand. Actually, when the county rezoned this area for residential development, all properties were automatically included in our association. You owe $3,200 in back fees, plus $150 monthly going forward. Community standards apply to everyone now. Wait until you hear the dog whistle language she used next. I pulled out my property deed, the one I'd studied dozens of times since inheriting the place. "This land has been in my family since 1942. I never signed any HOA agreement. The rezoning supersedes individual property rights," she said, like she'd memorized it from a legal manual. "Your unkempt lawn, that commercial vehicle," she pointed at my work truck with obvious disdain, "and that unapproved structure, my barn built in 1960, are all violations of community standards. We simply can't have certain elements affecting everyone else's property values. The way she said certain elements while looking directly at me made my jaw clench. 20 years in the Marines, 2 combat tours, a Bronze Star, and I'm still getting coded language about not belonging in nice neighborhoods. But her next comment crossed a line that would come back to haunt her. I tried staying reasonable, keeping my voice steady despite the disrespect. Look, I'll maintain the property better if it's bothering folks, but I'm not paying for services I don't use. Her eyes narrowed with the kind of cold calculation I'd seen in enemy territory. Mr. Washington, this is a family-oriented community. We have standards here. People like you need to understand that actions have consequences. People like me, there it was. Mom, what exactly do you mean by people like me? Property owners who don't respect community values. She backpedaled quickly, but the damage was done. This can go easy or hard, Mr. Washington. I have connections in local government, and we know how to protect our investments. That night, I spread all of Granddad's old papers across my kitchen table, my military-trained mind processing every document like intelligence briefings, property surveys, tax records, utility easements, and tucked between them, something interesting. This hidden document would become the nuclear option in my legal arsenal. The HOA's incorporation papers had been filed improperly. According to county records, my property boundaries extended further south than I'd realized. And, most importantly, there was a notation in Granddad's deed about mineral rights and historical protections that might complicate any HOA claims. Here's something every property owner should know. Property boundary surveys always trump subdivision plats when there's legal conflict. Always request an official survey before accepting any HOA's claimed jurisdiction. But I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go, or that Victoria's desperation had nothing to do with my lawn, and everything to do with covering up the biggest fraud our county had ever seen, while using racial intimidation to silence anyone who might expose her. The fake cops she sent next weren't just about intimidation. They were about sending a very specific message to a black veteran. 2 days after I refused Victoria's demands, she escalated faster than I expected, and in exactly the way I'd feared as a black man in rural Georgia. I was elbow deep in my neighbor's pickup engine when unfamiliar voices drifted across my driveway, the kind of authoritative tone that makes every black person's stomach drop, especially when you hear it on your own property. 2 men in matching blue polo shirts stood by my mailbox, clipboards ready for battle. The taller one had a gut that screamed, "Mall security," while his skinny partner kept clicking his pen like a nervous tick. Both wore badges hanging from lanyards that looked about as official as a kid's sheriff costume. But here's the part that revealed their true intent and Victoria's real strategy. "Terrell Washington," Gut Guy announced, making my name sound like an accusation. "County Code Enforcement. We're here about multiple violations on this property." I wiped grease off my hands with a rag, studying their fake badges up close. My late wife had worked for the county assessor's office, so I knew what real government IDs looked like. These weren't even close. "Can I see some official identification?" They exchanged that look white men give when they realize they're dealing with someone who won't automatically submit to authority. The skinny one actually reached toward his belt, a gesture designed to be noticed. "These citations are for operating commercial vehicles in residential zones, unpermitted structures, and," he paused for effect, "suspicious activity during late hours." Suspicious activity. The oldest racist dog whistle in the book. "What department are you with exactly?" I kept my voice level, drawing on Marine training to stay calm when every instinct screamed danger. "Environmental and zoning enforcement," the skinny one mumbled, avoiding eye contact like a teenager caught lying. The paperwork looked professionally printed, I'll give them that. But real county inspectors don't show up unannounced to harass veterans, and they definitely don't use coded language about suspicious activity when describing a black man working on cars. "I'll need to verify this with your supervisor," I said, memorizing their white pickup's license plate. The Gut Guy stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way calculated to intimidate. "Sir, I'd suggest you cooperate with this investigation. We've had complaints from concerned neighbors about the type of activity happening here." The type of activity, more coded language. And what type of activity would that be? People coming and going at all hours, loud noises, the kind of disturbances that make families feel unsafe. I was fixing neighbors' cars as favors, but in their telling, I was running some kind of criminal enterprise, classic racist playbook. Take normal behavior and paint it as threatening when a black person does it. as they practically burned rubber getting out of my driveway. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust hung in the morning air like a warning. 20 minutes later, I had the county clerk on the phone. "Hi, I just received citations from your environmental and zoning enforcement officers. Could you walk me through the appeal process?" "Sir," the clerk said slowly, "we don't have an environmental and zoning enforcement department. Who exactly gave you these citations?" Bingo. Victoria had crossed the line from petty HOA tyranny into actual criminal behavior, with a racist twist. I remembered reading somewhere that impersonating government officials carries serious jail time. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a felony, possibly a hate crime. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Deputy Rodriguez at the Sheriff's Department, spreading out photos of the fake badges and their license plate number. "Let me run these plates," he said, typing into his computer. Deputy Rodriguez was one of the few Latino officers in our department, and I could see him connecting dots that might have been missed by others. "Well, that's interesting. Vehicle registered to Willowbrook Property Management, LLC, same address as the HOA office. Same question I'm asking," I replied. "But Deputy, there's something else you should know. The racial undertones in their language weren't subtle." His expression hardened. "Mr. Washington, this is more serious than typical neighbor disputes. The federal government takes a dim view of using fake law enforcement to intimidate minorities. I'd strongly recommend security cameras and documenting every interaction. That advice would prove invaluable when Victoria's racism became impossible to deny. My military training had taught me the value of being prepared. I spent the next morning installing a 6-camera system: driveway, workshop, front porch, back gate, and 2 hidden units in the old pecan trees that would be invisible to casual observation. The cloud storage would automatically save everything, so even if someone destroyed the cameras, the evidence would survive. Maria would have been proud of my technical skills. While I was mounting the last camera, Victoria launched her neighborhood smear campaign with language that revealed her true motivations. My phone started buzzing with next-door notifications about an emergency community meeting to discuss problematic property owner behavior and protecting our investments from declining property values. But the private messages were where the real racism lived. Mrs. Henderson shuffled over that evening with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and some disturbing intelligence. The smell of vanilla and butter reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen back when black families had to be careful about which neighborhoods they entered after dark. "Terrell, honey, that woman's got some of the newer folks all twisted up. She's been saying things, well, things that remind me of uglier times. Claims you're planning to turn this place into some kind of urban business that'll bring the wrong element to our family neighborhood." Urban, wrong element. The racist language was getting bolder. "What exactly did she say, Mrs. Henderson?" "She asked if people were comfortable with those people operating businesses in residential areas. Said property values always drop when certain demographics move in." Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. "Honey, I lived through integration in Alabama. I know racist code when I hear it." I thanked her for the heads up and made a decision. If Victoria wanted a public forum to air her bigotry, I'd give her one, with recording devices running. I gathered my grandfather's original property deed, some historical photos from the 1940s, and headed to their next HOA meeting like an uninvited guest with a truth bomb and the moral authority of 3 generations of black property ownership. What happened next would be captured on multiple phones and go viral within hours. The community center was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car when I walked in. 40-some residents turned to stare as I made my entrance, carrying a manila folder thick with evidence. The whispers started immediately. You could feel the tension. Some neighbors supportive, others clearly uncomfortable with my presence in their space. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice respectful but firm. "I'd like to address some concerns about my property." Victoria's face went from surprise to barely controlled rage in about 2 seconds. "This is a private meeting for HOA members only. You're trespassing on private property." "Actually, this is a public community center," I replied, pulling out the historical photos. "And I think folks might be interested in seeing what this area looked like before Willowbrook Estates existed." The photos showed my grandfather's farm stretching across rolling hills with the old craftsman house standing proud among pecan trees and vegetable gardens. Several residents leaned forward, genuinely curious about their neighborhood's black history, something Victoria clearly didn't want discussed. "My family has maintained this land responsibly for 80 years, I continued, through segregation, Jim Crow, and integration. I'm happy to keep it looking nice, but I never signed any agreement to join your association. Victoria's response revealed the racism she'd been hiding. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. I could see doubt creeping into some faces and support in others. Maybe the scary property value destroyer wasn't so scary after all. But Victoria wasn't having it. Her composure cracked completely. "Security!" she shouted, though there wasn't a security guard within 10 miles. "I want this person removed for harassment and intimidation. We can't have these people disrupting our meetings and making demands." These people, said in front of 40 witnesses. 3 uncomfortable-looking residents approached me like they were defusing a bomb. I handed out copies of the historical photos as I walked toward the door, keeping my smile genuine and my tone friendly. "Anyone who wants to discuss this like civilized neighbors knows where to find me. My grandfather always said good fences make good neighbors, but respect makes good communities." That night, Victoria filed a harassment complaint with the real police, claiming I'd disrupted a private meeting and made threatening statements. But she'd also revealed her true motivations to a room full of potential witnesses. When Officer Johnson showed up at my door, his body language suggested he'd heard this song before. "Mr. Washington, I'll be straight with you. We've had multiple complaints about HOA overreach in this area, and some of them have included concerning language about race and property values. Just keep documenting everything and avoid direct confrontation when possible." But the real bombshell was what he told me as he walked back to his patrol car. As Johnson was leaving, he stopped and turned around. "Oh, one more thing. That property management company from your fake officer incident, same address as your HOA office building. Might want to take a closer look at your property boundaries. And, Mr. Washington, if anyone uses racial language during these disputes, call us immediately. That changes everything legally." I spread my property survey across the kitchen table that night, studying every line and measurement with new eyes. That HOA office building was sitting awfully close to what looked like my property line. If my growing suspicion was right, Victoria's desperation was about to make perfect criminal sense, and her racism would become the evidence that destroyed her completely. The sound of paper rustling filled the quiet house as I discovered something that would flip this entire situation upside down. 3 days after my uninvited appearance at the HOA meeting, Victoria decided to play lawyer, with a racist twist that would prove to be her downfall. A certified letter arrived at my door, thick, expensive paper with a law firm's letterhead that screamed, "We charge $400 an hour and we want you to know it." The cease and desist letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, demanding I stop interfering with lawful HOA operations, trespassing on community property, and my personal favorite, causing property damage through negligent tree maintenance and creating public safety hazards through suspicious automotive activities. But buried in the legal language was something that would become smoking gun evidence of racial bias. The letter specifically mentioned commercial activities inconsistent with residential character and attracting transient individuals who compromise neighborhood safety and family values. Transient individuals in legal documents. About a Marine veteran fixing neighbors' cars. I called my insurance agent first just to cover my bases. "Jim, hypothetically, if someone claimed my trees were damaging their property, what would you need to see? Evidence of actual damage, not just normal leaf drop," he laughed. "Terrell, trees don't become liable for being trees, but document everything. Take photos, keep records." Sounds like someone's fishing for a settlement or trying to build a harassment case. That advice stuck with me as I researched property surveyors. Maria always said I was too trusting, but losing her taught me that life's too short to let bullies push you around, especially when those bullies use the same tactics that kept my grandfather from voting in his own neighborhood. I hired Peterson Land Surveying. The $200 felt steep, but my grandfather used to say, "Buy truth, even if it costs you." While I waited for the survey, I found an attorney who specialized in both property disputes and civil rights cases. David Blackwood had the kind of reputation that made HOA presidents nervous, and racists even more nervous. "Terrell," he said during our consultation, "the fact that they sent fake government officials tells me they're desperate, but the racial language in their communications suggests federal civil rights violations. That changes everything legally." The survey crew arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning, and what they discovered would completely flip the power dynamic. The surveying equipment beeped and chirped like electronic birds as they mapped every inch of my property. I brought them coffee and watched them work, not knowing I was about to discover something that would destroy Victoria's entire operation. "Mr. Washington," the lead surveyor called out around noon, "you might want to see this. Your property line extends about 30 feet further south than your old survey indicated. GPS technology has gotten much more precise since the 1990s. My heart started pounding as he showed me the measurements. That strip of land included the exact spot where the HOA had built their office building. "Are you telling me their office is on my property?" "According to our measurements and the county's original land grants, yes, sir. About half that building is sitting on land you own." But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Hidden in my grandfather's deed was something that would make Victoria's life a living hell. I spent that evening comparing the new survey with county records, property tax maps, and the HOA's incorporation documents. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Victoria had built her power base on stolen ground, literally. But there was more. My grandfather's deed included language about historical property protections and mineral rights in perpetuity. Apparently, the land had some kind of historical designation related to Underground Railroad activity that I'd never known about. Any development on historically protected property required federal approval. The HOA office building had been constructed without those permits. The next morning, I caught Victoria red-handed parking in my driveway, strutting around like she owned the place. The crunch of her designer heels on gravel announced her arrival before I even looked up from my coffee. "This driveway easement is HOA common area," she announced like she was reading from a script. "You're required to share access with community vehicles." "Ma'am, this has been my family's private driveway since 1942. You need to move your car." Her response revealed just how deep her racism ran. "I don't think so, Terrell." The way she said my name dripped with condescension. "People like you need to learn that property ownership comes with responsibilities to the community. We can't have this area looking like, well, like some urban housing project. People like me, property owners who don't understand suburban values," she backpedaled, but her true feelings were clear. "This isn't the inner city. We have standards here." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my property. "I'm documenting continued violations for our attorney. The broken-down vehicles, the commercial signage, the general urban aesthetic. The dog whistles were becoming air horns." 20 minutes later, she was back with a landscaping crew that started dismantling my mailbox. "This structure violates community aesthetic standards," she told the confused workers. "The HOA will install a compliant replacement." I called the post office immediately. "Someone just removed my mailbox claiming HOA authority. Can they do that?" "Absolutely not," the postal supervisor said. "Mail delivery obstruction is a federal offense. File a complaint immediately and reinstall your mailbox wherever you want it on your property." That afternoon, I drove to Home Depot and bought the biggest, most beautiful mailbox they had, solid cast iron with Washington 1942 engraved on the side. If Victoria wanted a mailbox war, she picked the wrong Marine. While I was installing it, my attorney called with news that would change everything. "Terrell, I've been reviewing HOA incorporation laws, and there's something interesting here. They can't enforce rules on non-members, period. But if their office building is actually on your land, they've been trespassing for years. How much are we talking about in damages? Commercial lease rates for office space, plus improvements made without permission, could be $50 to $70,000. But here's the bigger issue. If this property has historical protections, they've violated federal law by building without proper permits." "What kind of federal law?" "The kind that involves FBI investigations and potential criminal charges for all involved parties." That night, Victoria filed another police report, claiming I'd threatened her during the mailbox incident. When Officer Rodriguez showed up, the same deputy who'd taken my fake cop report, he looked genuinely annoyed. "Mr. Washington, she's claiming you said you'd make her regret messing with your property and used racial language. Did you say that?" "I told her removing my mailbox was illegal and she'd regret not checking federal postal regulations first. As for racial language, officer, you've got the wrong person. I've got everything recorded." He nodded and closed his notebook. "Thought so. Between you and me, we've gotten 8 complaints about this HOA in the past month. Half of them include concerning language about race and property values." As he was leaving, Rodriguez added something that made my pulse quicken. "Your surveyor's report is going to be interesting. County Planning Department is asking questions about that office building's permits. And, Mr. Washington, the FBI has a civil rights task force that's very interested in HOA cases involving racial harassment." I pulled out the survey results that night, studying them under my workshop's bright fluorescent lights. The smell of motor oil and sawdust, mixed with anticipation, as I realized I held something more powerful than any lawyer's letter, mathematical proof that Victoria's empire was built on my stolen land. But what I didn't know yet was just how deep her financial desperation ran, or how far she'd go to keep her secrets buried. The insurance fraud, the inflated contracts, the shell companies, all of that was still hidden beneath layers of fake paperwork and racial intimidation. What I was about to discover would expose a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond one racist HOA president. All I knew was that tomorrow I'd start using this survey like a loaded weapon in a legal war that would destroy not just Victoria's HOA scam, but her entire carefully constructed facade of suburban respectability. I was finally ready to win, and this time her racism would be her downfall. The vandalism started exactly 1 week after I installed my new mailbox, and it followed a pattern I recognized from my grandfather's stories about intimidating black families in the Jim Crow South. I woke up to find all 4 tires on my work truck slashed, the cuts deliberate and clean. Someone had taken their time to make sure I'd need a tow truck and a day off work. But they'd also spray-painted something across my windshield that made their true motivations crystal clear. Go back where you came from. The racial slur underneath was so vile I won't repeat it here, but it would become key evidence in federal hate crime charges. But here's where Victoria made her first major mistake. She didn't know about my hidden security cameras. I'd installed the obvious ones where anyone could see them, but my paranoid military training had me hide 2 additional cameras in the old pecan trees and behind the barn. The metallic smell of spray paint hit me when I walked outside to survey the damage. Someone had painted over the lenses of my visible cameras, thinking they'd covered their tracks. Real professional job, I muttered, uploading the hidden camera footage to my laptop. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m., and there she was, Victoria Whitmore herself, directing 2 men in dark hoodies as they vandalized my truck and security equipment. But what made this footage pure gold wasn't just the criminal damage, it was the audio of Victoria's instructions to her accomplices. Make sure he gets the message. These people think they can just move into nice neighborhoods and bring their ghetto nonsense with them. Paint something that'll remind him where he belongs. Those words, captured in high-definition audio, would destroy her life completely. I called my insurance company first. Jim, remember that hypothetical property damage we talked about? It just got real, and it's definitely a hate crime. The adjuster who came out was a sharp guy named Rodriguez, who'd seen this pattern before. Mr. Washington, we've had 12 similar vandalism claims in your area over the past 6 months. All the victims had HOA disputes, and 7 involved minority homeowners. The FBI's Civil Rights Task Force is starting to notice patterns. You think this is organized racial harassment? I think someone's running a systematic intimidation campaign using classic white supremacist tactics. Keep those camera files safe. We might need them for more than just your claim. While I waited for the tow truck, Victoria was busy orchestrating what she called an emergency neighborhood safety meeting. The next door notifications started flying immediately, but these weren't about property values anymore. The mask was completely off. Dangerous individual threatens community safety and family values. Criminal activities violate zoning laws and endanger children. Property values at risk from urban elements infiltrating our neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door that evening with her usual plate of cookies and some deeply disturbing news. The warm smell of oatmeal raisin couldn't quite mask the worry in her voice. Terrell, that woman held a meeting at the community center this afternoon. She's got some folks convinced you're running an illegal drug operation disguised as an auto shop. Did she actually say that? Honey, she didn't have to. She had fancy charts about crime statistics in urban areas and talked about how certain demographics bring certain problems to family neighborhoods, used every dog whistle in the racist playbook. But Victoria's private comments to her inner circle were even worse. Mrs. Patterson was there, the elderly lady from Maple Street. She came by afterward looking sick to her stomach. Said Victoria told a small group that they needed to protect their investment from the kind of people who destroy property values wherever they go. I thanked Mrs. Henderson and spent the evening reviewing my property survey again. Something kept nagging at me about the office building's location, so I drove over there after dark with a flashlight and measuring tape. The building sat on what was clearly my land according to the survey, but there was more. County records showed it had been built without proper permits, and the historical protection violations were staggering. My research session was interrupted by my phone ringing with news that would escalate everything. Mr. Washington, this is Detective Williams with the County Fraud Unit. We understand you've been having some issues with fake law enforcement officers and racial harassment. That's right. I filed reports with Deputy Rodriguez. We'd like to talk with you tomorrow. Seems your HOA has been busy with more than just fake badges and racist vandalism. We're also investigating connections to similar harassment campaigns in 3 neighboring counties. The next morning brought another escalation designed to hit me where racists always attack black men. My livelihood, my power was mysteriously shut off. According to the utility company, I had unpaid bills dating back 3 months, despite my account being current and automated payments coming out of my checking account. Sir, we show complaint calls from neighbors about illegal electrical connections and safety violations. Someone reported drug manufacturing equipment drawing excessive power. Drug manufacturing, the oldest racist lie in the book. I pulled up my bank statements on my phone. I can prove every payment. Someone's filing false complaints with racial motivations. It took 4 hours and 3 supervisor calls to restore my power. But the pattern was becoming crystal clear. Victoria wasn't just fighting for $3,000 in HOA fees. She was trying to force out the black family that threatened her white suburban fantasy. At the fraud unit office, Detective Williams spread out a file thicker than a phone book. Mr. Washington, your HOA complaint started something bigger. We've been investigating Willowbrook Property Management for suspected insurance fraud, but your evidence adds a civil rights dimension that changes everything. What kind of pattern? Organized harassment campaigns designed to force out minority property owners, then filing fraudulent insurance claims for the damage they caused themselves. Your hidden camera footage shows the same individuals we've seen in other cases, but this is the first time we have clear evidence of racial motivations. The detective showed me photos from 5 other properties. All had experienced similar vandalism, utility harassment, and fake government inspections. 4 of the 5 victims were minority families. But the real bombshell came when Detective Williams revealed the scope of Victoria's criminal enterprise. The good news is you're not alone, and the hate crime charges make this a federal case. The bad news is this appears to be organized crime masquerading as neighborhood governance, with a white supremacist agenda. That afternoon, I got a call from Jake Morrison, the HOA treasurer. His voice was shaky, like a man who'd discovered something he wished he hadn't. Terrell, I need to talk to you privately. There are some financial things that don't add up, and after hearing what Victoria said at that meeting, I can't be part of this anymore. We met at the diner on Highway 9, away from neighborhood eyes and ears. Jake looked like he hadn't slept in days, constantly checking over his shoulder while he talked. I've been treasurer for 2 years, and I always wondered about some of these expenses. $50,000 for landscape improvements that I never saw happen. $30,000 for legal consultation on cases that never went to court. He slid a manila envelope across the table. I made copies before Victoria could stop me. Terrell, I think she's been stealing from every family in this neighborhood and using racial fear to keep people from asking questions. The bank statements inside told a story of systematic theft that made my blood boil. Payments to shell companies, inflated contracts with family members, and cash withdrawals that disappeared into Victoria's personal accounts. We were talking about nearly $200,000 over 3 years. Jake, why are you showing me this? Because I have kids in this neighborhood, and they're mixed race. My wife is Latina, and I've started hearing the things Victoria says when she thinks I'm one of her allies. She's not just stealing money, she's building a war chest for racial intimidation campaigns. He paused, stirring his coffee nervously. And because I figured out something else, that office building where she holds all these meetings, I looked up the property records. It's not sitting on HOA land. It's on your land. Every meeting, every decision, every racist conspiracy planned in that building. Legally questionable if it's on stolen property. Terrell, you don't just have a harassment case or a property dispute. You're sitting on evidence that could shut down a racially motivated criminal enterprise that's victimized dozens of families. Driving home that evening, I realized this had grown beyond a simple property dispute or even typical HOA corruption. Victoria wasn't just a petty neighborhood tyrant with racist tendencies. She was a criminal who'd built an empire on fraud, theft, and racial intimidation, using the fears and prejudices of white suburbanites to fund her crimes and silence her victims. And now I had the evidence to bring it all crashing down while exposing the ugly racism that made it all possible. The sound of gravel crunching under my tires felt different as I pulled into my driveway. This wasn't just my grandfather's land anymore. It was ground zero in a war between justice and corruption, between racial equality and white supremacist intimidation. And I was about to choose which side would win. The boxes of evidence Jake had smuggled out of the HOA office covered my entire kitchen table like pieces of a financial puzzle with racist overtones. My attorney, David Blackwood, sat across from me, his reading glasses reflecting the glow of spreadsheets that told a story of systematic theft spanning 3 years. "Terrell, this is bigger than we thought," he said, flipping through bank statements. "Shell company payments, inflated contracts, mysterious cash withdrawals. We're looking at nearly $180,000 in fraudulent expenditures. But combined with the racial harassment evidence, this becomes a federal civil rights case. But the real bombshell came when we traced the office building's ownership through layers of legal paperwork. Victoria hadn't just built the HOA office on my land without permission. She personally owned the building through an LLC called Heritage Community Solutions, a name that took on sinister meaning given her racist rhetoric. "Let me get this straight," I said, feeling my blood pressure rise. "She built a building on my property, then charges the HOA $4,200 a month to rent space in a building she owns, using money stolen from homeowner fees, all while running racial intimidation campaigns. It gets worse." David spread out county documents across my grandfather's old oak table. "Look at these property tax records. The office building parcel was never legally separated from your property. She's been avoiding thousands in annual property taxes by letting you pay them on the full 3.2 acres. The sound of papers shuffling mixed with my growing anger as the scope of Victoria's fraud became clear. This wasn't just about HOA overreach or even typical suburban racism. She'd created an elaborate financial scam using stolen land as her foundation, while weaponizing racial fear to silence opposition. "Here's the smoking gun," David continued, pointing to a series of payments. "Landscaping contracts with her brother-in-law's company, security services from her nephew's business, and legal fees to a firm that exists only on paper. Every vendor getting inflated contracts is connected to her family." I walked to my kitchen window and stared out at the HOA office building, its brick facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. That building represented everything wrong with unchecked authority: corruption dressed up as community service, racism masquerading as property protection. "David, if I can prove ownership of that land, what happens to all the contracts and decisions made in that building? Legally questionable at best, but more importantly, if we calculate commercial lease rates for office space over 3 years, plus improvements made without permission, we're talking about substantial damages. Add in the civil rights violations, and the federal government becomes very interested." My phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. "Detective Williams, FBI Civil Rights Task Force wants to meet. Federal hate crime charges likely. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The meeting at the FBI field office felt like stepping into a different world. Special Agent Sarah Chen had spreadsheets, maps, and evidence photos spread across a conference table that could have seated a small army. "Mr. Washington, we've been investigating patterns of racially motivated HOA harassment across the Southeast. Your case provides the missing piece we needed: clear evidence of organized criminal activity with racial bias. How many other cases are connected?" 17 confirmed incidents across Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. Always the same pattern. Minority families move into predominantly white developments, face escalating harassment disguised as HOA enforcement, then either sell below market value or get driven out through systematic intimidation. Agent Chen showed me comparison charts that revealed the scope of the conspiracy. "Victoria Whitmore isn't working alone. We've identified a network of property management companies using similar tactics. They target integrated neighborhoods, install puppet HOA boards, then loot homeowner fees while using racial fear to maintain control. So this is bigger than just my neighborhood. Much bigger. You've helped us identify a sophisticated criminal enterprise that's stolen over $2.3 million from minority homeowners across multiple states. The property violations, fake law enforcement, racial slurs, vandalism, it's all part of a coordinated strategy." The agent pulled out transcripts of intercepted communications. "We've been monitoring Victoria's phone calls since your complaint. Listen to this conversation with her co-conspirator in Birmingham." The recorded call made my stomach turn. Victoria's voice came through the speakers. "The Washington situation is getting complicated. The Namian veteran is smarter than we expected. We might need to escalate to the final solution." "What's the final solution?" her accomplice asked. "Same thing we did in Tuscaloosa. Late-night visit from our friends in the White Hoods. Usually gets the message across when legal harassment fails." Agent Chen paused the recording. Mr. Washington, that final solution language and references to friends in white hoods suggest connections to white supremacist organizations. This isn't just fraud anymore, it's domestic terrorism. Driving home, I realized I'd uncovered something much larger than a neighborhood dispute. Victoria was part of a regional network using HOA structures to commit both financial crimes and hate crimes, targeting minority families across the South. But her most desperate gambit was still coming. That evening, Jake called with panic in his voice. "Terrell, emergency HOA board meeting tomorrow night. Victoria's planning to vote on dissolving the entire association and transferring all assets to her shell companies. If there's no HOA, she thinks there's no crime. Wrong. Dissolving an organization to avoid criminal liability is obstruction of justice. But Jake, we need to move up our timeline." "Already done. I drove to the FBI field office this afternoon and turned over everything." "Terrell, I also found something else in her files. Correspondence with white supremacist groups about reclaiming suburban America from urban invasion." The scope of Victoria's criminal enterprise was growing by the hour. This wasn't just local HOA corruption with racist undertones. She was running a regional hate crime operation targeting Black and Latino families, using legal-sounding HOA enforcement to disguise systematic racial harassment and financial theft. That night, I sat on my front porch, watching the lights in the HOA office building, knowing it might be the last evening of relative calm before federal agents arrested everyone involved in the conspiracy. The sound of crickets mixed with distant traffic, creating a peaceful soundtrack that belied the chaos about to unfold. My phone buzzed with updates from the FBI task force. Tomorrow, justice would either triumph publicly, or Victoria would discover that federal hate crime charges don't disappear when you dissolve a HOA. The weekend before our planned confrontation, Victoria unleashed what I can only describe as desperate racist warfare. If she was going down, she intended to take me with her using every white supremacist tactic in the playbook. Saturday morning brought a sheriff's deputy to my door with a temporary restraining order. According to Victoria's sworn affidavit, I had made racially charged threats during our Thursday encounter, stalked her around the neighborhood in a threatening manner consistent with urban gang behavior, and created reasonable fear for personal safety based on his aggressive demeanor and known criminal associations. Criminal associations. She was literally using racist stereotypes in legal documents. "Mr. Washington, I have to serve this, but between you and me, the judge seemed very skeptical," Deputy Martinez said quietly, "especially about the language used in the petition. You're ordered to stay 100 yards away from Ms. Whitmore and her property pending a hearing on Tuesday." I pulled up my security footage on my laptop and showed him Thursday's break-in and bribery attempt, including Victoria's racist comments. "Deputy, she came into my house uninvited and used racial slurs. I have the whole thing recorded in high definition." His expression shifted from official duty to genuine outrage. "Sir, I'm going to need copies of this footage for my report. What you're showing me contradicts her statement completely and suggests possible hate crime violations." By Monday morning, the restraining order had backfired spectacularly. Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the security footage during an emergency hearing and not only dismissed Victoria's petition, but sanctioned her for filing false documents with racial bias. "Ms. Whitmore," the judge said sternly, "attempting to misuse the restraining order process to silence a minority citizen with legitimate property claims while using coded racial language in your petition is a serious abuse of court resources. You'll pay Mr. Washington's attorney fees for this frivolous filing, and I'm referring this matter to the state bar for investigation." But Victoria's desperation had only begun. That afternoon, County Business Licensing showed up at my workshop with a complaint that reeked of racial profiling. The inspector claimed I was operating an unlicensed commercial automotive facility with suspected drug manufacturing equipment in violation of residential zoning laws. Drug manufacturing, the most racist accusation possible against a black man with an auto shop. When I showed him my business license and explained that I only worked on neighbors' vehicles as favors, he looked confused and apologetic. "Mr. Washington, someone filed a complaint claiming you're running a full-scale drug operation disguised as an auto repair business, but all I see is a clean workshop with basic tools. This complaint seems both exaggerated and problematic in its assumptions." After he left without issuing any citations, I called Detective Williams. "She's trying every racist angle to get me shut down before Monday's meeting." "Terrell, that's actually good news. False reports to government agencies with racial bias can be prosecuted as both harassment and hate crimes. The FBI is building a pattern evidence file. Keep documenting everything. The character assassination campaign reached peak racism on Sunday, when anonymous flyers appeared on every doorstep in the neighborhood. The headline screamed, "Dangerous criminal threatens family safety," above a grainy photo of me working under the hood of my truck. But the flyer's language revealed Victoria's true white supremacist agenda. The text claimed I was an unstable urban individual planning to convert residential property to drug manufacturing operations, and included fabricated quotes from concerned parents about the safety of our children when criminal elements infiltrate family neighborhoods. Urban individual. Criminal elements. Every racist dog whistle in the white supremacist playbook. Mrs. Henderson called within an hour of the flyers appearing. "Terrell, honey, this is backfiring on her worse than she realizes. 5 neighbors have already stopped by to ask if you're okay and whether they can help. People aren't as stupid as she thinks." Indeed, the propaganda campaign seemed to be generating sympathy rather than fear. Jake Morrison reported that several homeowners had approached him asking pointed questions about HOA finances and Victoria's use of racial language after reading the obviously biased flyers. They're wondering why she's so desperate to use racist tactics against a decorated veteran instead of addressing legitimate concerns about missing money. But Victoria's most dangerous gambit came Sunday night, and it crossed every line possible. I woke up to the sound of breaking glass from my workshop, followed by the acrid smell of smoke. Someone had thrown Molotov cocktails through the windows, setting fire to my tool storage area. More horrifying was what the arsonists had painted across my barn door in 3-foot letters, "Nigger go home," with a crude swastika underneath. The volunteer fire department responded quickly, but not before several $1,000s worth of equipment was destroyed. The arsonists had specifically targeted my evidence storage area, but the fireproof safe where I kept backup documents survived. The racial graffiti, however, had been photographed by multiple neighbors before anyone could clean it up. "This is attempted destruction of evidence combined with hate crime arson," Detective Williams said as firefighters finished their work. Federal prosecutors take a very dim view of using white supremacist terrorism to obstruct justice investigations. The security cameras captured everything, and the footage would destroy Victoria's life completely. 2 figures in dark clothing with distinctive white hoods, moving with the kind of nervous energy that suggested amateurs trying to look professional. One of them walked with Victoria's distinctive gait, while the other limped in a pattern I'd noticed in earlier footage. "We'll have arrests by morning," Williams assured me. "But Terrell, I'm worried about tomorrow's confrontation. Someone willing to commit arson with racial terrorism might escalate to personal violence." That concern proved prophetic when I checked my answering machine Monday morning. 5 anonymous messages had been left overnight, each escalating in threatening language and explicit racism. "Drop this or you'll regret it, boy." "Your wife died easy. You won't be so lucky, nigger." "Last warning, coon. Back off or join her in hell." "We know where you sleep, Jungle Bunny." "Time to teach this uppity nigger his place." The references to Maria's death combined with racial slurs made my blood boil, but they also provided crucial federal evidence. Threatening a witness in a civil rights investigation was a federal crime carrying mandatory minimum sentences. The voice recognition software David's office used identified speech patterns consistent with previous recordings of Victoria and her co-conspirators. By noon Monday, the media attention had reached critical mass. Sarah Paulson's preliminary article had gone viral on social media, generating tens of thousands of shares and comments from racism victims nationwide. Local television news trucks started arriving in the neighborhood, setting up for live coverage of the evening's confrontation. "Terrell, you've become the face of a national movement," Sarah told me as we reviewed her final article draft. "I'm getting calls from civil rights advocates, federal hate crime investigators, and legal reform groups. This story is resonating because it exposes how modern racism hides behind suburban respectability." The community center parking lot filled up 3 hours before the meeting was scheduled to start. Word had spread beyond our neighborhood. Homeowners from surrounding areas, civil rights activists, FBI agents in plain clothes, and media representatives wanted to witness what many were calling a pivotal moment in the fight against suburban white supremacy. But Victoria had one final card to play. At 4 p.m., her attorney called mine with a settlement offer that would have impressed a mob lawyer trying to avoid federal prosecution. Complete ownership transfer of the office building, $150,000 in cash, public apology for any misunderstandings about race, resignation from all HOA positions, and relocation to another state within 30 days. She's offering to disappear completely, David told me. No criminal charges, no prosecution, no media attention. You get your land back and she vanishes. What about the $200,000 stolen from homeowners? What about the hate crimes against other families? She'd establish a restitution fund, but there's no guarantee everyone gets fully repaid, and the federal civil rights investigation would be suspended if you don't cooperate. I thought about my grandfather's advice about difficult decisions, but this time the answer came easily. David, those families deserve justice, not just partial restitution from someone fleeing hate crime prosecution. We're going public tonight. As evening approached, I realized that Victoria's escalating racism had actually strengthened our case beyond anything we could have planned. Every false report, every threatening message, every piece of white supremacist graffiti had created additional evidence of federal hate crimes. The smell of determination mixed with righteous anger as I prepared for the most important confrontation of my life. In 2 hours, I would face down a white supremacist criminal in front of cameras, reporters, and an entire community that deserved to know the truth about the racist conspiracy that had stolen their money and terrorized their neighbors. Win or lose, tonight would end Victoria's reign of racial terror forever. The community center had never seen anything like it. By 6:30 p.m., more than 400 people packed into a space designed for 150. With overflow crowds gathering outside around speakers Sarah Paulson had arranged for live coverage. The squeaking of metal folding chairs mixed with nervous chatter as neighbors who'd barely spoken before found themselves united by curiosity, outrage, and a growing understanding that they'd been victims of both financial fraud and racial manipulation. Sarah positioned herself near the front with photographers, live streaming to her newspaper's social media accounts. The viewer count climbed steadily, 500, 200, 3,800, 8,500 people watching online, as our small-town drama attracted national attention from civil rights organizations and federal investigators. County Commissioner Williams sat in the third row, notepad ready, while Detective Martinez and 2 FBI agents lingered near the back exits in plain clothes. My attorney, David Blackwood, arranged evidence boxes on the front table like ammunition for a legal war. Mrs. Henderson arrived wearing her best church dress and carrying a folder of historical documents. Terrell, honey, I've been waiting 78 years to see justice like this. Let's give 'em a show. Victoria entered at exactly 7 p.m., flanked by the 3 remaining loyal board members who hadn't resigned in disgust. She wore a navy business suit that probably cost more than most people's car payments, but her usual confident swagger had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like barely controlled panic mixed with desperate rage. This meeting will address routine HOA business only, she announced, her voice echoing through the packed room. We have no time for outside agitation or personal grievances from non-members who don't understand community standards. The coded language was subtle, but every black person in the room caught the implication. A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. Jake Morrison stood up from the middle section, his treasurer's notebook in hand. Point of order, Madam President. State law requires that homeowner concerns be addressed in public meetings, regardless of membership status. Mr. Morrison, you're out of order. This is a private association for people who understand and respect suburban values. Suburban values, another dog whistle. Actually, Ms. Whitmore, you're out of order, called out a voice from the back. Commissioner Williams rose from his seat. As an elected county official, I'm here to observe proper procedure and ensure transparent governance. Please continue, Mr. Morrison. Victoria's face flushed red, but she couldn't eject a county commissioner from a public meeting. Fine. We'll allow limited public comment, but I reserve the right to maintain order and community standards. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 400 pairs of eyes, as conversations died to whispers. The smell of nervous sweat and cheap coffee filled the stifling room as I walked to the front, carrying the surveyor's report that would change everything. Neighbors, my name is Terrell Washington. Some of you know me as the mechanic who's been causing trouble about HOA fees. Tonight, I want to show you exactly what kind of trouble we're really dealing with. I unfolded the property survey and held it up for everyone to see. This is an official county survey of my grandfather's property, conducted 3 weeks ago using GPS technology. According to this survey and county land records, the HOA office building behind me is constructed on land that my family has owned since 1942. The room exploded in surprised chatter, but Victoria's response revealed her true character. Victoria shot to her feet, her mask finally slipping completely. That's a fabricated document designed to disrupt legitimate community governance by someone who doesn't belong in this neighborhood anyway. The racial undertone was unmistakable. Several people gasped at the boldness of her implication. "Ma'am, this survey was conducted by Peterson Land Surveying and certified by the county auditor's office," I replied calmly. "But the illegal office location is just the beginning of what you folks need to know about where your HOA fees have been going and what tactics have been used to silence anyone who asks questions." I nodded to Jake, who began distributing copies of the financial evidence we'd prepared. Over the past 3 years, nearly $180,000 in homeowner fees have been diverted to shell companies owned by Ms. Whitmore and her family members. The rustling of paper filled the room as people examined bank statements showing payments to fake vendors, inflated contracts, and mysterious cash withdrawals. Gasps and angry mutters started building as the scope of the theft became clear. But Victoria's response took the racism from dog whistles to air horns. "This is slander," Victoria screamed, abandoning any pretense of parliamentary procedure. "I've dedicated my life to protecting this community's values from people who want to destroy everything decent families have built here. I won't stand here and be attacked by some urban thug with delusions of grandeur," urban thug said in front of 400 witnesses. The room fell silent. Even her supporters looked uncomfortable with the blatantly racist language. Mrs. Henderson stood up with the righteous fury of someone who'd seen this playbook before. "Victoria Whitmore, you should be ashamed of yourself. That man is a decorated Marine veteran who lost his wife to cancer and came here looking for peace. Instead, you've terrorized him, stolen from his neighbors, and shown your true racist colors for everyone to see." The applause was thunderous and sustained. Even some of Victoria's former supporters were clapping as the elderly woman continued her passionate defense. "I've lived in this area for 78 years, and I remember when the Washington family bought that property during Jim Crow. Terrell owns every square inch of the land that building sits on, and you've been trespassing for 3 years while stealing money from hard-working families and using racist tactics to silence opposition." But I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone and activated the speaker function. "Neighbors, I want you to hear something recorded in my living room last Thursday," and the racial language Victoria used when she thought no one was listening. Victoria's voice filled the room through the speaker. $50,000 to make this disappear, Terrell. Think about what that money could mean for your business, your future. People like you don't usually get opportunities like this. Then my voice, "People like me?" Her recorded response, "Urban individuals who don't understand how suburban communities work. This isn't the inner city. We have standards here, and frankly, your kind of demographic usually brings property values down wherever you go." The room fell deadly silent as the implications hit home. Victoria had just admitted in her own voice that the office building was illegally located, that she was willing to pay bribes to cover it up, and that her motivations were explicitly racial. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "that's the voice of your HOA president attempting to bribe a crime victim to conceal evidence of fraud while using racist language to justify her actions." Detective Martinez stepped forward from the back of the room, his badge now visible on his belt. "Victoria Whitmore, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, bribery, obstruction of justice, and federal hate crime violations." The crowd watched in stunned silence as he read her Miranda rights. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the community center as 3 years of criminal behavior and racist harassment finally caught up with the woman who'd terrorized our neighborhood. As Detective Martinez escorted Victoria toward the exit, she finally broke down completely and revealed the full extent of her racism. "You don't understand," she screamed at the crowd. "I was protecting this community from people who don't belong here. Property values always drop when certain types move in. I did everything to preserve the kind of neighborhood decent white families deserve." The mask was completely off, no more dog whistles. Pure, undiluted racism in front of 400 witnesses and live cameras. These people think they can just move into our neighborhoods and change everything. Someone had to stand up for traditional American values. Commissioner Williams stood and addressed the crowd as the arrested woman was led away in handcuffs, still shouting racial epithets. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you've witnessed why transparency in governance matters, and why hate has no place in our communities. The county will be launching a full investigation into HOA practices throughout our jurisdiction and will implement reforms to prevent both financial abuse and racial harassment. The applause was deafening, lasting nearly 5 minutes. Sarah's live stream had reached over 25,000 viewers, and the comments were flooding in from racism victims nationwide, who saw hope in our small-town victory over white supremacist tactics. Jake Morrison stepped to the microphone, his voice shaking with emotion. As interim treasurer, I motion to dissolve the current HOA structure and form a legitimate homeowners association with full financial transparency, democratic governance, and zero tolerance for racial discrimination. Seconded, came voices from throughout the crowd. All in favor? Jake asked. Nearly every hand in the room went up as people began filing out of the community center. Dozens stopped to shake my hand, apologize for not speaking up sooner, or share their own stories about Victoria's abuse of power and racial intimidation tactics. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my arm as we walked toward the parking lot. Terrell, your grandfather would be so proud. You didn't just save your own property, you exposed a racist criminal conspiracy and saved this whole neighborhood. Looking back at the HOA office building that had caused so much trouble, I realized the real victory wasn't reclaiming my land or seeing Victoria arrested. It was watching a community rediscover that ordinary people working together with courage and evidence could defeat both corruption and racism, no matter how well disguised or entrenched they seemed. Tomorrow would bring federal prosecutors, restitution claims, and the long process of healing from years of racial harassment and financial theft. But tonight, justice had won in the most satisfying way possible, publicly, completely, and with the whole world watching a racist criminal get exactly what she deserved. 6 months later, I woke up to something I thought I'd never hear again, the sound of children's laughter drifting through my bedroom window. Kids of all colors were playing soccer in what used to be Victoria's perfectly manicured HOA common area, their joy echoing across property lines that no longer felt like racial battlegrounds. The transformation still amazed me every morning. My workshop, once a lonely refuge for a grieving veteran, had become the neighborhood's unofficial community college. 3 evenings a week, I taught automotive basics to teenagers whose parents had gone from avoiding me to trusting me with their kids' futures. The smell of motor oil mixed with hope as young hands, black, white, Latino, Asian, learned skills that could support them for life, working side by side in the kind of integrated harmony Victoria had tried so hard to prevent. Victoria's legal reckoning had been swift, thorough, and very public. 24 months in federal prison for hate crimes, conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations, $347,000 in restitution orders that would follow her for life, permanent banishment from property management, and a federal civil rights monitor that would track her activities for the next decade. Her ex-husband had moved to Oregon and changed his name, while her children transferred schools to escape the shame of having America's most notorious racist HOA criminal for a mother. The white supremacist network she'd been part of was dismantled across 3 states, with 17 other conspirators facing federal charges. The office building that started this whole war had become our community's greatest success story. Instead of tearing down the structure built on my stolen land, I donated its use to our reformed neighborhood association. The ground floor buzzed with activity, free legal clinics, computer classes for seniors who'd been intimidated by Victoria's fake complexity, ESL classes for Latino families, and transparent budget meetings where every dollar was accounted for in plain English. Mrs. Henderson, now 79 and sharper than ever, had created a civil rights exhibit upstairs, showcasing our journey from racist corruption to inclusive cooperation. School groups toured regularly, learning how ordinary citizens could defeat entrenched hate through documentation, courage, and community solidarity. Her favorite display featured Victoria's mugshot next to a quote from Dr. King. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Our cooperative management model saved homeowners 43% on legitimate services while actually improving quality. Competitive bidding, transparent accounting, and democratic oversight had eliminated the 200% markup Victoria charged for basic maintenance through her family's fake companies. But the healing from racial trauma mattered more than money. Sarah Paulson and I had built something beautiful on the foundation of our shared fight for truth and justice. Our engagement at the neighborhood Juneteenth festival had drawn cheers from former enemies who'd become genuine friends and allies. The investigative reporter who'd helped expose racism was now the woman who made my morning coffee taste better and my future look brighter. The Samuel Washington Memorial Scholarship, named for my grandfather, had awarded its first recipient last month, a young Latina woman studying automotive technology who reminded me why fighting both corruption and racism matters. When working-class families of all colors can afford college because we recovered their stolen HOA fees and dismantled white supremacist intimidation campaigns, every legal battle and sleepless night becomes worthwhile. Our story's national impact still surprised me. Congressional testimony about racist HOA tactics, federal civil rights investigations in 43 states, millions in recovered homeowner funds, and new laws protecting minorities from housing discrimination, all because one stubborn black veteran refused to pay extortion fees to racists. The Terrell Washington Civil Rights Act now protected minority homeowners nationwide from racial harassment disguised as HOA enforcement, proving that small-town victories could create nationwide change in the fight against modern segregation. The consulting work felt surreal but meaningful. FBI civil rights agents called for advice on identifying racist HOA patterns. Attorneys flew in from California to discuss similar cases involving housing discrimination, and victims from Alaska to Florida shared stories of racial harassment that made Victoria's crimes look almost modest in scope. My business cards now read, Terrell Washington, Auto Repair and Civil Rights Consultation, a combination that would have sounded ridiculous 2 years ago, but made perfect sense in a country still fighting the legacy of housing segregation. Property values told the real story of transformation, and 22% increase since the racist corruption ended proved that inclusive, honest governance attracted buyers rather than scaring them away. Young families of all backgrounds moved in specifically because of our reputation for transparency, racial harmony, and zero tolerance for discrimination. Fear had been replaced by the kind of mutual support that turns houses into homes and neighbors into family, regardless of race or background. Jake Morrison's leadership as our elected association president had healed wounds that seemed permanent during Victoria's reign of terror. His monthly community barbecues brought together people who'd cross streets to avoid each other, creating friendships built on shared relief from oppression rather than shared racial anxiety. Detective Williams, now heading the county's hate crime unit, stopped by occasionally to share updates. Terrell, 23 additional property management companies are under federal investigation because minority victims found courage in your story. You started something bigger than you realized, a national movement against racist housing practices. The physical changes completed our emotional healing. Victoria's former parking spot had become a community garden where elderly residents of all backgrounds grew vegetables and children learned cooperation across racial lines. The smell of tomatoes ripening in my grandfather's former soil felt like justice taking root in the most literal way possible. Standing in that garden on quiet evenings, I sometimes marveled at the journey from victim to victor. The path had required everything: courage when I felt afraid, patience when I wanted immediate results, evidence when emotions ran high, and allies when isolation felt easier. But the destination was a community stronger and more inclusive than before, and personal peace I hadn't felt since Maria's death. Our annual Civil Rights and Property Justice Day celebration had become the region's signature event for educational outreach. Children of all colors learned that David could still beat Goliath with the right tools and moral authority. Adults discovered that transparency and inclusion prevented both corruption and racial conflict better than any law, and elderly residents shared wisdom about the difference between authority and authoritarianism, between community standards and racist exclusion. The wedding planning with Sarah filled my spare time with joy instead of legal strategy. The same barn where I'd once sorted evidence of financial fraud and hate crimes would host our ceremony, with Mrs. Henderson officiating and 300 neighbors of all backgrounds celebrating love built on shared principles of justice rather than shared trauma. If you're fighting racist HOA abuse right now, remember this: document everything obsessively, build diverse alliances strategically, and never let bigots convince you that justice is impossible. Your courage might save not just your own property, but an entire community's financial future and moral character. The racists are counting on your silence and isolation. Drop a comment sharing your worst HOA nightmare or experience with housing discrimination. Your story might inspire the next person who needs to hear that resistance works, justice is possible, and hate never wins in the end. And where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these justice stories travel and how they inspire people fighting similar battles. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more civil rights victory stories, because next week I'm bringing you something unbelievable. A school principal who embezzled $400,000 from student fundraisers while using racist language about minority families, but forgot the new PTA treasurer was a forensic accountant and civil rights lawyer. That revenge gets served colder than Minnesota justice, and you won't believe how it ends. From my workshop in the most transparent, financially honest, racially inclusive, and genuinely neighborly community in 3 counties, this is Terrell Washington reminding you that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to fight like hell for an equal future. The sound of laughter and learning continues as another generation discovers that fixing engines and fixing systemic racism require the same essential tools: patience, precision, and the unshakable belief that with enough work and moral courage, everything broken can run smoothly again. You've been watching HOA Justice Stories, where entitled racists get a reality check. If this episode gave you second-hand rage, satisfaction, or hope for justice, hit that like button, leave your take in the comments, and subscribe so you're the first in line for more weekly victories against corruption and hate. Remember, when good people stand together across racial lines with evidence and courage, hate never wins. Justice always finds a way.